Hi, it's Ursula from ursula-smith.com, and today I'm doing something different. I'm trying to learn Illustrator. I've kind of gone back and forth with it a few times and whatever. It's not as intuitive to me as Photoshop. So in this case, I have an image that I had created in Photoshop and made a pattern out of it, a repeating pattern. And so I brought it into Illustrator, I traced it, and then was able to color it, whatever color I wanted, this cream color background. And then I decided, oh, maybe it'd look cool if it had a line. So I added a line to it. And when you bring it in to create a pattern in Illustrator, the line is placed also not only on the interior shapes, but it ends up on the edges of that repeating pattern. And so when you bring it in to make the pattern, now in the middle of all your repeats, you're going to have two lines, which just looks ridiculous. So this video is about how I go about trying to get rid of those exterior lines. And basically what I do is I use the eraser tool to go in and erase those lines at the edges. It could be a little bit tedious, but it's not too bad because there's generally not a ton of exterior lines, at least for the stuff I've been working on so far. And so, you're just going to go along, you're going to erase into the shape color, and you're not really getting rid of that line, you're just kind of moving it inward. And so in this case, oopsie, I went in a little bit too far, so I just undid and redid it a little bit. And then you kind of move on to the next section and you keep going through until you're done. And like I said, it doesn't take all that long, especially once you kind of get used to it. But all you're trying to do is make sure that that black line is not at the edge of your shape. In my case, I knew my shape was 8.5 by 11. And the shape literally went to the edge of that rectangular box. And so I'm just pushing that edge line in. You will be left with little stray kind of overages, if you will, and I'll show you how I deal with that when I make patterns in a future part of the video. But in this case, all I'm trying to do is get rid of those edges, and then I will come back over the top with the original traced shape. And so in this video, I had not made a copy of the trace shape. So I'm going to stop it at this point and then start back up basically when I'm going to basically go off and retrace this piece. So that was the original image in raster format, and I'm going to go off and retrace it, and I will be back when that is done. Okay, I am back, and so basically I left you, I had forgotten that I took the original rasterized image that I traced and made that cream color and then added the line. I'd forgotten to make a copy of it, so I basically had to go back in, take the rasterized image, go through and trace it. Originally I just did a black and white trace, and I didn't play around with any of the advanced options. I think I chose to ignore the color white. And so then I was just left with the traced image of that black, and then I could come in and change the fill color to that cream. And so what I should have done was taken that cream colored traced image and made a copy of it initially, and I didn't, so I just did that. So now I am left with, and I'm just centering that new copy and layering it over the image that I had traced and then erased. So now I am left with the original traced image layered over the traced image that I had added the line and then erased. And so what I'm left with is the illusion that I have a lined image without the lines showing up at the repeat edge. So this is what I was trying to accomplish. I could not find another way to do it, so this was my workaround for it. And you can see that it does that, at least in appearance. There are, once you add the lines actually go over the repeat edge. I found this in Photoshop too. If I add like a drop shadow or things like that, it just, Adobe, I don't know, whatever. I think they should be able to handle edges of repeats a little bit better than they do. But they don't. And so this is my workaround to it. And so I think I'm going to go through now and kind of show you what I mean if I take this image or these layers and try and create a pattern from it at this point. You'll see it doesn't line up properly because of those little bits of black line kind of popping out over the repeat edge. And so the original was an 8.5 by 11, which translates to 612 by 792 points. And so I'm just pointing out, see, it doesn't connect. So it's not, so the repeat looks terrible. I mean, it looks better than having black lines run through the middle of it, but it still is not perfect. And so I could go off and clean up, but I will warn you ahead of time, because my first thinking was, oh, I'll just take a rectangle and crop the lines to the border that I know, the size of the border. And I think I'm trying to do that here. So I'm creating a rectangle the size of the repeat, and thinking I can go through and just crop those lines down to the size of the rectangle, and that will get rid of those overlapping bits. And so the pattern will create itself a little bit better. So I'm just lining up that rectangle to the artboard, which should also center it with the images underneath. And then I'm going to go through and try and do this crop idea. So I can't remember if I actually created copies of them or I just did it straight. I think I just did it straight. So I'm coming through and just selecting the piece that was the traced image with the lines that I erased. And that's the one that I really need to crop, because the original is the correct size and it doesn't go over the repeat border. And so I select the two of those and I come down to Pathfinder and I'm going to do crop, which is fine. And then what happens when I finish that is it turns that erased image into the same appearance as that rectangle, which is cream, no border. And so I was like, oh, okay, I guess I have to add the line back. So I go through and select that now cropped erased image and try and add the line back in. And as usual, it is an aggravating result with the lines added right back in. So don't do that. So I will show you the workaround to this. So I undo all of that because clearly that didn't work. I think at one point I tried to go through and turn it into a compound path. That didn't work either. So the workaround that I found was to go back to the two layers the original cream colored shape of the original trace, and then the lined version that I erased, and I select the two of those and I rasterize it. So I'm turning it back into an image. And so then I select that rasterized image and I'm going to retrace it. And I think maybe I'm doing a copy. I can't see quite what I'm doing there. Oh, I think I'm doing a copy first so that I'm left with the original just in case. And having a little bit of trouble doing the copy. Oh, I'm moving it to a new layer, yeah. So a lot of times that's what I do is I'll make copies, move it to a new layer, and so then I am left with something I, have a backup of. So I'm going to rasterize this new copy, turn it back into an image, and then I'm going to take that copy and I'm going to retrace it. And this time I'm going to trace it as colors. And in general, most times when I do a trace, I go into the advanced and I turn off, I ignore white. But in this case, you really don't want to. So you're going to choose 3 colors, at least in this image, because I have the black outline, the white background, and then the colored insides. I'm turning on preview just to see what it looks like. You'll see as it goes along, I did not choose the advanced settings where I, fiddle around with the path and the curves and all that. I liked it the way that it looked right kind of out of the box. It was a little more artsy looking. So I just went ahead and expanded that. And now I am back to an Illustrator vector. And with still no lines at the ends, at the repeat edges. And so, at this point, I decide I'm going to go back to that rectangle. I'm going to align it with the new traced image, and I'm going to try and crop it. Oh, I decide, nope, I'm going to do the same thing I did before where I'm going to try and make copies of it so that if it doesn't work, I can go back. I mean, I could always do an undo, but sometimes it's just easier to create copies. And then if you get several steps down the road and you forget what you did, you can kind of just start over. So that's kind of how I work. And then I can go back and clean up layers later if I need to. So in this case, I'm going to select the 2 new layers and go to Pathfinder, do a crop. And then all looks good this time. Doesn't add, doesn't mess up the coloring, doesn't mess up the lines. And so now I'm going to go select that cropped version and bring you back into, I think I'm going to bring you back into the pattern if I do it here. I might be talking about coloring. I can't remember where I tried to go back in to do a pattern. So if I'm not doing that here, I'm going to stop. If this is about coloring, I'm going to stop and restart with a different video because this coloring is a mess. And I'm just trying to see. Nope. Yep. No, I'm going back into the pattern. So at this point, it's been cropped. I think it should look perfect, but it doesn't. And so there's still some space in there caused by those lines kind of bumping out over the edges. And so at this point, rather than going back in and trying to clean up again, I just do it directly in the pattern make. And so I know this should be 612, so I try that first. I had unlinked in a previous thing and then just changed the width. That still didn't seem to work. And so I then decide that I'm going to try and change the repeat border manually. And so I turn that on, kind of bring it out to bring it back in and re-click. And in this case, I really kind of had to zoom in to see what was going on. It still wasn't quite there, so I'm trying to tweak it a little bit, trying to pull that in just a hair. And then I scroll over and realize, no, I need more copies so that I can see what's going on. And it's closer, but it's still off just a tiny bit. So I go back over, and if you zoom in, you can tweak it a little bit easier, especially if you're literally closing it by a hair. And then I come back over, and that looks okay to me. Again, this is a more artsy vision of what I was working with. I kind of liked it, so that is what I am going with. And at this point, I'm going to click done to actually, cement that pattern as it is. However, I will tell you at this point, this pattern cannot easily be recolored. I'll talk about that in a different video, but in the next step, all I'm going to show you is basically how to use this pattern as it is currently. And so I'm going to, so the pattern is created, it's added to my swatches. I'm going to go in and create a new artboard. And then I'm going to create a new rectangle that is the size of that pattern, 8.5 by 11. And then I'm going to just make sure I'm on the artboard that I want to and center it. And then I'm going to go and try and fill it with that pattern. And I wasn't paying attention, so it was set to stroke instead of fill. So I have to go back and reset the stroke back to black and then add the fill. And so now my rectangle's filled with that pattern. And then the next thing I'm going to do is change the scale of that pattern. It takes me a hot second to figure out where it is, because I was trying not to use S. And so there it is. And then I turn off changing the size of the rectangle and just the size of the pattern. And I'm setting it to 50. And there it is. So pattern looks decent. I really like it. And the one thing that I'm pointing out here is Illustrator has the ability to do some blending mode. It's not quite as robust as Photoshop, but it does do some cool looking things. So I like having these patterns in these like cream colors with the black, because it works well with those blending modes. And so I'm going to go off and restart the video where I talk about trying to color this image. Okay, I am back, and I wanted to talk about coloring this pattern. So if your stroked and filled pattern seems to be working out okay, you don't mind tweaking it in the pattern making tool, then the previous clip where I went through and rasterized and cropped and all that, you don't have to do that. That just kind of worked for me, and then I knew I had the shape in the
where I wanted it. So I didn't have to worry about lining things up when I went back in to make patterns. But if you're fine with tweaking the pattern tweaking the borders in the pattern making tool, then you could just start from this phase. And so in this phase, I have a layer with the erased lines image and then the original where it's just the fill color layered over each other. And so in order to color it, so there's two ways you could go about this. I could just color it here. Make a copy. I always make copies. So make a copy of the two layers, or groups, make a new layer for those groups, and then come in and I can pick the underlying group. And in this case, I really don't care about the fill because the fill is covered by the top one. So I can just change the stroke and I can make it whatever color I want. So let's pick teal. Let's actually zoom in a little bit so you can kind of see it. So now the stroke is teal, and then I can select the original that has no stroke, and I can change the fill to a different color as well. And from here, I could select both, go into Object, Pattern, Make, and make a new pattern. But you'll see, I still have the issue of the broken pattern because of the lines kind of bumping out over the border. So that previous clip where I rasterized it, I cropped it, that was to get rid of that. Again, you could go in here, and I did show you that, where you can tweak the border and try and bring it in. But if you're going to start from those two layers and do this every time and change it to a bunch of colors, you're going to have to remember to do this every time. Once you've made the pattern, so that this is another way you could do it. So let me just get it to where, all right, that looks good enough. I'm just going to click done. So now I have that pattern in my swatch panel. So I could also, once I have the original pattern created, I can just double click on that pattern, go in and try to select the colors. I'd have to zoom out to see where I'm at. All right, so I think I might have the, I'm not sure if I have anything selected here. Okay. I don't know if it shows isolation mode. So this, to me, this like double clicking in to get into isolation mode is just annoying. So I'm going to show you another way that I do it. I just find it easier. I could go through and recolor if I wanted. So that, again, that may be the easier way to do it. If all you're trying to do is recolor this artwork. So rather than doing, the individual bits and pieces, I can go in here. Oh, okay. So I think I have a video on this issue. I did have just the fill selected, so I could have just gone into the swatch panel and changed it individually, but I'm going to select the whole thing, come into recolor, and now all the colors are selected, so then I can go in and, pick colors to change them to, cycle through and do it that way. If you're going to do it that way, what I would suggest is, oops, no, I don't really like that color, but whatever. I guess it doesn't really matter. Okay. I always pick, I don't want to change the swatch group. And then what I usually do if I'm recoloring a pattern is I save a copy and then I hit cancel. So I'm going to save a copy. You can name it if you want. And then I hit cancel. And so now when I go back to the swatches panel, I have the original as well as the new, different color pattern. So that's probably the easiest way to recolor. However, the other thing that I really kind of wanted was to have each of the piece parts separate. So the background, I didn't really need the background, but I wanted the fill separate as well as those outlines. If I go back to, let me go to the layers. Oops. So if I go back to the layers, so this is the original traced. Oh, interesting. Oh, maybe did I? Oh, yeah, I guess I colored. So if I go back to the original traced, let's go back to the color that we started with. It was something around that color. And then this was the erased lines. So I had the fill and then the stroke was black. So that was the original, and just so that you're clear, oh, I keep hitting layers. Okay, so just so that you're clear, I have the cream color, no stroke on top. If I turn that off, this is the same, basically I started with the same object, I added a stroke, and then I erased into the fill, so I was left with this wonky shape, and then layered the two over it. So I can't just select the top layer. Well, I can select the top layer and have its own fill because that's what I started with. But I can't go through, for instance, and select the bottom layer and say, oh, I just want stroke with no fill, because it's not the full image because of that erasing that we did. And so if I wanted the original image with just the stroke, that's kind of why I had to do that layering bit. And then I get that illusion. So I'm hoping this all makes sense. But in any event, if you had gone in and cleaned up, I'm trying to zoom in here. So if you had gone in and just kind of gone in, maybe you went into the direct selection tool and you're really good, and whoops, I'm not really good, where you could move and line it up with the edge so it doesn't pop over. But to me, that was really tedious. And so that's why I did the step in the previous version to rasterize and retrace and then crop. I couldn't figure out a way to crop this as it stood in this layered. I tried to group it, tried to create a compound path, and I still couldn't figure out how to do it. So in any event, that's why I did that last step in the last video. But if all you're trying to do is, or if you don't mind tweaking in the pattern, and again, like I showed you earlier, you could just tweak the pattern once and then change the colors in the pattern making tool, that you should be good to go. But I was also trying to accomplish something else, like I said, to try and isolate the lines as well as the fills. So this just gives you two ideas of what you can do to color your artwork as it stands, where it's just a layered group, or two layers, over each other. And in the next video, I'm going to work with where I left you in the last segment, where I then, on top of this, went to rasterize this whole thing and retrace it into a single object. So I will be back. Okay, so I have walked you through this layered image or objects. Sorry, I keep thinking in terms of Photoshop. These layered objects to create the illusion that there's no lines at the edge of this repeating pattern. And in a previous clip, I had showed you that I would take the layered objects, rasterize them so that I could crop it to the actual size of the bounding rectangle that I knew was how my original image started, basically 8.5 by 11. So I'm left with this cropped vector object that fits nicely in the bounding box, and creating a pattern works so that I don't have to worry about changing the bounding areas of the pattern and fiddle around with, tweaking it in or out, generally in, because of the stray bits that are left when I gave a stroke to the original image. So at this point, again, the easiest way is probably so it depends. If you want to take the original cropped image and change the color and then remake a pattern, you could do that. The easiest way is probably to make this into a pattern, go into the pattern, double click on the pattern in the swatch, which I showed you in the previous, and then just recolor that. If you want a little bit more control, and that's, or you want to separate it out, that's kind of what I was looking for, because I wanted these lines as I wanted just the original where it was just a fill, but I was also looking to perhaps have just the lines be on their own, kind of their own entity. And if I select this, coming through and trying to, I guess I could do recolor, but just trying to give it a fill and stroke didn't seem to work. So that's what I basically get. So I can't do that. I could go in and again kind of select each piece and separate it out and recolor them individually, which I will show you how to do. Or I could use recolor. Oops, sorry, I might have clicked in too deep. So select and then do recolor, and that is interesting. Oh, yes, okay. So it has the 3 colors here, and so I can go through my swatches and just pick, something to recolor, and then cycle through and see about picking some other colors. And so, okay, that looks good. So then I can click OK. I don't want to save changes to the swatch group. And so I now am left with a recolored version of the cropped image, and then I can go and make a pattern. So it's kind of up to you how you want to do it. But it still doesn't solve my issue of having the lines on their own. But if all you're looking to do is recolor your pattern, again, you can either do it this way before you create a pattern with just the cropped object, or you could you could create the pattern, double click on the pattern in the swatch, and then recolor in that venue. So I'm going to undo, just Control Z. And let's see. So I'm back to what I had before. And in this case, I'm going to try and click in to select the individual pieces. So I'm going to try and double click to get into isolation mode. And I'm going to select same. I'm not sure what I have selected. So I'm going to select fill and stroke. Usually what I do here is I hit Control X. Nope, so nothing has been deleted. So, well, that was not good. Oh, I might have gone back too far. Okay, sorry. This part to me is finicky. So what you're trying to do is get the piece parts that have the same, fill and stroke or fill. So I'm going to select fill color. And again, if I try, I can just color it, whatever. But sometimes I try and do a delete and then undo. So it looks like I did get that fill color. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to edit, cut, and then get out of isolation mode. Go to my layers. I'm going to create a new layer. And I probably should have clicked copy. I'm not going to undo because that just gets so confusing, but that's what I probably should have done. And then I'm going to select the new layer and edit, paste in front. So I'm now left with the fill, which basically is similar to the original traced image. It's got a little bit of difference to it just because of all the rasterizing and retracing I did. So now on this layer, I'm left with basically the lines and the background. So if I want to change the background, I can select a piece that is part of the background, select same, fill color, and then, no, I guess I didn't get it. All right, select same, fill color, and then either cut or copy. I'm doing cut, so I'm going to select that and then get out of isolation mode, turn on the new layer. You know what? Okay, so I forgot to do this step. So in the previous step, I should have grouped this whole thing. So I'm going to group it now and just call this fill. And then I'm going to paste in front. You can paste in back. It doesn't really matter. Paste in front. So that's all the white. I'm going to hit Control G to group it. And then I'm going to name this background. And I'm going to go back to the layer. So at this point, all I should have is the lines. So I'm going to cut them, go back to the new layer, edit, paste in front, group it, and rename it to strokes. and I probably want the background underneath, which is fine. So now I'm left with everything as piece parts. So I could, um, I could change the background color if I wanted to. I could get rid of the fill and just be left with lines that I could make into a different pattern. So that's, to me, that was the most flexible option, and that's what I ultimately ended up doing. So now when I want to use this pattern, I can pick the piece parts and decide, which ones I want to use. Once I've created the pattern, like I said, I could always go back in, edit the pattern, recolor it, save a copy. And when you do that, make sure that instead of clicking done, you click cancel, because otherwise you're going to recolor the original pattern. So I think I talk about that in one of my videos because that bit me in the butt one too many times. So in any event, this is what I did to create a pattern in Illustrator from something I started with in Photoshop, and then be able to add a stroke to it without having the lines at the edges of that repeating pattern, and then be able to color it and be able to have piece parts where I could do the fills or the lines or both together, and recolor it to the way that I would like it to be. So hopefully this was helpful, especially if you're new to Illustrator like I am and you're in a situation and tearing your hair out. Hopefully this was helpful. Thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next time.